Hi, I'm Rich Wynn.
And I'm Rebecca Nixon, and this is the PropTech Growth Podcast.
Every episode, we interview an expert in the PropTech startup space, gathering their advice and expertise to help you run a successful PropTech business.
I'm the Portable PropTech CMO, and I help PropTech startups build and scale their commercial growth strategy.
I'm Rich from Rich Wynn Consultancy. I specialise in operations, sales and process, helping fintechs and PropTech companies to grow.
Thank you very much, Rich. Rebecca, lovely meeting you both. My journey, I qualified as a barrister in 1982. I never intended to practice law, but I thought it would be a great educational start. And got a job on a building site as a labourer. Within 3 weeks, I was working with the two directors as a director in the business. I bought a property with them. And we did this during the early 80s. Developed properties in London, built houses in London, converted flats, the usual sort of thing one would do. We had a property crash in 89, which was horrendously severe. It makes the crashes we've had recently seem like tea parties. It was bitterly difficult in 1990, and no development was going on, no banks were lending money. So we were looking for something to do ourselves. And I got sent a set of property details of a property called 10 Roselle Road in Clapham. And it was up for sale by private treaty through an estate agent. And I remember it had gone through an auction, or I thought it had gone through an auction 6 months previously. I went through a massive pile of catalogues we had in the office, found the property, phoned the auctioneer up and said, could you tell me what happened to 10 Roselle Road? I gave them the lot number. They said, we don't really keep results. I said, you must know, because after the auction, you would tell me what it's available at. We had bought and sold properties at auction by this stage. And she said, that's all in the bidding book, that's in the safe, and the keys are in the auctioneer's pocket, and he's out to lunch, he won't be back till tomorrow morning. And that really frustrated me. And I said to my two colleagues, are we the only people who want to know what's happened in the past at auctions? We all figured we weren't. So we quickly went out to WH Smith and bought 3 clipboards, 3 borrows, and a pad of paper, and decided we would go to every auction in London and write down what properties sold for. And if it didn't sell, go and ask the auctioneer after the event what they're available at. And so we would then sell a report. This back in 1990. There was no fax machines around. Fax machines were just coming out. And we got a guy to write some software to sit on a computer where we could submit a list of fax numbers, and the computer would send a fax out to all our subscribers. And that's really how the business started. I always felt that the technology was going to be my friend here. And very quickly we started doing fax back for the auction results. So you could dial a number from your fax machine and get the results sent back to you. In 92, we developed a system whereby members of the public could dial a number and listen to the auction live, so they could follow the auction. By 95, we started a database so that you could say, I'm interested in houses which are sold in Guildford, for example, a very elementary database which sat on the client's machine, and we'd update it once a week by a disk being sent out. But by 96, we had a website, and we were one of the first websites in the world. I remember reading an article the day we went live in the Financial Times, and it said there are now over 30,000 websites worldwide, and this number is set to grow. That was a pretty sharp observation that there was going to be more than 30,000 websites. Anyway, I was very pleased to think we were one of those. And from there, we've gone on to provide a range of services for auctioneers. We developed a system for hosting legal documents. Before you bid at auction, you need to look at the legal pack, and we set up a website whereby auctioneers could upload legal documents for each lot, and members of the public could register to download and see what's on those documents. And that's growing to be a pretty big side of our business. Since we started, we've had over 1.2 million people register to look at legal documents over the last 27 years, or however long it is. We've uploaded over 200,000 documents for all the lots that have been offered since then. And this is a staggering figure. We've had over 30 million documents downloaded from when we started. And I think we've basically saved the planet, because that would be a lot of paper being sent out in the post. And that's what used to happen. Before we started this, people used to pay 25 quid on a credit card, and the auction house would photocopy the legal pack as they had it and send it out. But of course, you're only seeing what they had. If the extra documents coming later, you wouldn't know about them. And the other main milestone for us is in 14, we went live with an online auction platform, eBay style. And since then, we've sold over 35,000 properties on it and had over 700,000 bids placed. So that's the way forward now, is online auctions. Room auctions are becoming a thing of the past, although we do a lot of live stream, which works very well. The auctioneer sits or stands in front of a camera in his office, very occasionally in a room with the public. That's quite rare now, and calls for bids, and people can register to bid online. So there's a wide variety of ways property has been offered at auction now.
Something that we've touched on before, COVID must have wiped out a lot of people actually turning up to auctions and doing that sort of thing.
Just before Christmas, I was, like everybody, following in the news, and when I saw Woham being locked down, I had a meeting with some of my guys here and said, look, if this COVID thing comes to England and we get locked down, there are going to be no room auctions. It's all going to be online. So just before Christmas 2019, we started building websites for most of the auctioneers, so that if it did happen, we could have it on the shelf and say, there you go, get going with it. And we wrapped this up, and by mid-February, we had built a website for basically every auctioneer, just in case. It didn't take long to do, just brand it up. And when Boris said those mortal words, you must stay at home, my phone rang off the hook. And in the first week, we got 60 auctioneers up and running live, holding auctions. And by and large, everybody's continued doing it that way. Very few people have gone back to the room. Barnum Marcus has gone back to the room for the last year. Allsop were going to go back to the room, but then the RMT decided to have a rail strike, so they postponed going back to the room. And I think that just shows how perhaps vulnerable you are to things completely outside your control. A virus, COVID, and rail strikes. And quite a few auctioneers have said they're never going to go back to the room. They're going to stay online. They find it so much better, easier to run. There's more transparency. They get fantastic data feedback because they can see exactly who's registered a bid on what lot, where their limit was. And we provide them after the event with a huge amount of data, which they can use for analysis purposes. But there will be people who are going back to them, and they're getting on well. So it's a bit of everything, really.
What's amazing to me is almost your foresight. You saw it coming and everyone knew it was going to come, but you actually did something about it. Because if you think about those 60 websites that hadn't been made, the auction industry could have just fallen off a cliff.
It might have had a bump in the road. We would have caught up with it. They would have found a way around it.
Of course.
I've got such a fantastic team here. That first week, we were starting at 7 a.m, not finishing till 11 at night. They did a fantastic job. And and the auctioneers rallied around and bought into new techniques. You know, some had told me just sort of a month before, we're never going to go online. It's got to be in the room, and they embraced it. So it was a win for everybody, really. I'm proud to be a part of it.
And you're also part of PIP Faults.
Yes, indeed. I alluded to how we've provided this document room service for the auctioneers, because on the fall of the gavel, there is generally an exchange of contracts. So you have bought the property. So you've got to be absolutely sure as to the legal position of the property when you're bidding at auction. And so by hosting the legal documents, potential bidders can read through the documents, get the lawyers to check them, raise any inquiries they've got. And anybody who's listening to this and thinking of buying at auction, it is absolutely crucial you go through that legal pack with a fine tooth comb. And let me say this, the most important document in the legal pack is the one which isn't there, the one which has been left out deliberately because it's got bad news. So if you're thinking, hang on, I want to know about this, phone up and find out where it is. A good example would be you're thinking of buying a flat and there's no service charge report or management documents for the maintenance of property. Why not? Are there horrendous arrears? You've got to ask the question. And if a document isn't forthcoming, you've got to think, should I bid or not on that? And that's really important to make sure you're aware of the legal pack. It never ceases to amaze me how, if I was to go and buy a car today, I'd find a car on, say, Auto Trader, I'd go down to the garage, I would have a test drive. Then the salesman would say, do you want to have a look at the book, the service history, the logbook, etc., etc. Make sure it's not on HPI, it's not a crash write-off. I'd do all that. And then I'd say, yeah, everything seems to be on order and paperwork. I'd like to bid you £10,000 for the car. When we get to the property, you see a property on Rightmove, you go and see it with an estate agent, you wander around, you say, this is lovely, we could do this and that and everything else to it. Oh, I'll give you £250,000 for this house. You haven't got a Scooby's what's in the legal pack. You don't know whether there's been a row with a neighbour. You don't know whether somebody's got a right of way of your drive. All these matters, and yet you're making a bid. And then 6, 8, 10 weeks down the line, oh, I didn't know about that. If I'd known, I wouldn't have offered that man's money. And then the renegotiation starts, or you walk away. It's bonkers. The property industry do it completely the wrong way round, in my view. The car trade don't. So we set up PIPs as an extension of what we do in the auction world to allow an estate agent to have a document room where the vendor, the estate agent, their solicitors, etc., can upload relevant documents, which every buyer or viewer of the property, to a greater or lesser extent, could look at and read and understand what's going on, and then make a judgment. For instance, they look at the TA6, which is a questionnaire the vendors have to fill out. There's one question which basically says, have you had a row with your neighbour? And if it said in there, yes, we ended up in court because my neighbour knocked me out, then you'll probably think, do I really want to live there? Am I going to put an offer in on a place like this? Whereas under the current system, you might not see the TA6 until 10 weeks after your offer's been made. You might look at the title deeds and say, hang on, this is not a main drain. It's got a cesspit in the garden. I don't want one of those and all the smells which go with it. I'm not going to buy it. So the current system is that you see a property, you make an offer, and then in dribs and drabs, and it is dribs and drabs over the next 10, 12, 15 weeks, documents will be fed through piecemeal from the vendor solicitor when they can decide to get it together, containing information which will give you a different view on the property, and ultimately might say, after 10 weeks, I'm walking away from here because I don't like what I read. And yet it was all available to read, or should be upfront when the property comes on the market. So PIP is property information products, and we see a situation whereby, and why wouldn't you want to start looking through some of the documents about the property? The TA6 tells you who owns the boundaries, are there any rights of way, all the things you want to know before you make an offer. And yet you might not see that until 8-10 weeks after your offer has been accepted, and there'll be information in there which says, I'm walking away. So we hear about properties falling through. Actually, it's because people are reading in the legal documents, or the solicitors are telling them news that they don't want to hear, and they decide not to buy. So if every property, and I think it will become, it's moving down to be mandatory, I think, in some stage in the future, properties, when they go on the market, have to have some documents for the public to read. If there's bad news in there, get it out early. Let's not all waste time and think, oh, somebody's offered 250 grand for my property. I hope they don't read the bit about I had a row with a neighbour last year. They're going to read it. So get it up front, get it out, manage the bad news or the not so good news in a measured way where you say, by the way, there was this dispute, but he's now moved on, or whatever. Or, yeah, we did have an issue with the right of way. We've now resolved that, and here's the paperwork. It's much better it's managed in that way than having the purchaser's solicitor discover it 10, 15 weeks down the line. So that's what we're doing, and it's gaining traction now.
It's not a blame game or anything like that I'm suggesting, but where does this land with? It lands with obviously the agents and the conveyancers working together. I'm part of the home buyer and sellers group, and on this particular issue, and they're trying to make something work, but it does take all sides to want to be able to do it. It does take the public to actually want to see this, rather than be bored of filling in forms before, or when they're selling the property, or one agent says, oh, you don't have to fill anything in, like with come with me. The other one's saying you have to fill in all these documents at the start, and they then may have questions for the agents, and the agents aren't conveyancers, so how would they know like what to put on a TA6 or TA7 in particular with the leasehold and all that side of it? What do you see as the answer to that?
Well, it's an education part, and I think it's going to become mandatory that you have to have this documentation available, or an amount of it available. Why we career into spending 6-7 digits on a property, making an offer, not know Scooby's about it, apart from the fact it's got a lovely kitchen and the garden is sunny. There's so much more to property than just the state of the kitchen and the garden. And it's all documented somewhere. And you will not exchange contracts until your solicitor is satisfied that all the information he needs to make sure you've seen and read is there. So let's get it going now. I've actually been putting together, and it's just about there now, a legal pack for my house. So I've got no intention of selling it, but if I did, I can say, there's the document, there's all the title, there are the guarantees for the new boilers we put in, there's the building control sign off, etc. Because you can say, oh, I don't plan to sell for 10 years. In 10 years, you might not be able to find the necessary documents, the sign-offs, etc. And then and the company who did the work has gone bust, so you can't go to them. You could be delayed 6-8 weeks just convincing somebody it is okay. So it's really important to do it at your leisure than when you're under pressure to do it because you're trying to sell a house and the buyer's going to pull out unless you can get the document done.
Well, we're doing that. We've got no intention of ever selling, but one day I'm not going to be here. And whoever has to deal with the house, if it's my child or friend or family member,
Yeah.
I don't want them to have to deal with trying to rifle through 20, 30, 40 years of paperwork. It all needs to be somewhere digital, easy to access, easy to understand. So I think every single person who owns a property needs to do this sort of due diligence. So must have, not a nice to have.
I say, just look at what we do. We keep all the bills for our cars in one place, and the house is worth 10, 20, 30 times more than the car. And we just don't have it. And when you come to sell it, it's an issue.
And again, I think we touched on this before, David. Obviously, you're doing it for auctions and have done for a very long time. Obviously, Zoopla, with the acquisition of Your Keys, for pretty much every new build goes through that, which again, I know new build, they've got all the information up front, and it's a much quicker and slicker process, and everybody's involved in that. And I think that it's time for the secondhand market to get on board with that. And I do agree on the education piece. I think it's who is going to actually step forward and educate, because obviously we've all lived through HIPs, which didn't come to anything. When you're selling your house, can you actually be bothered to do something up front where it's going to come out in the solicitors anyway? Yes, all right, 80% drops off, but that still means that 70% doesn't drop off. Yeah. So are you willing to pay your money, take your chance? Who is leading this fight as such at the moment to change the hearts and minds of agents, conveyancers, and the public in general? Who should it be?
Everybody moans about how long it takes to buy a property, and yet vast majority are guilty of not having done what we can easily do, is get the documentation ready for that day and keep it up to date. You have a boiler service, you just pop the invoice in the file. It's not difficult, but everybody moans.
This one's to you, Rebecca. From a marketing perspective, how would you put this forward? Because it's almost, it needs some brand marketing, but what is the brand, or who is that person that can market it? Where do you see that coming from?
Yeah, I think the B2B marketing piece here is the strong sell, because B2C is impossible to get people to pay for anything. If you're talking about something like an online file storage, no matter how sophisticated and incredibly helpful it's going to be for them in 5 years' time, they are not going to pay for that, obviously, and they probably don't need to. I think what we're looking at here is a really strong B2B proposition, because who has the biggest stake in speeding up the conveyancing process? Agents. There are a number of other interested parties as well, but I think more than ever, it's going to be agents who have the biggest stake. They're the ones who are hemorrhaging time and money when things go slowly. I'm happy to be challenged on that assumption. But I think in terms of getting things moving really quickly from the get-go, these agents should be investing in the platforms that make their jobs easier and faster. And I think the sort of value prop around that has to be a comparison internationally.
The agents can drive it, because the vendor goes as a consumer to the agent looking for advice. How many times do you hear, oh, the solicitor's waiting for the searches to come in? So we're working with agents. We'll fund the purchase of the searches from day one. So they're in there straight away. Personal searches, subject to them agreeing in the MOS, memorandum of sale, is a clause the buyer will pay £250 to the vendor or estate agent, which comes on to us for the searches. But I think everybody knows somebody who's waiting to buy a house, and they're just waiting for one last document. My sister-in-law was selling her house the other day, and the vendor had purchased. It must have dragged out on about 20 weeks. It came to the day of exchange, and at 10 o'clock, he said, "Oh, can I see the alarm service contract?" On the morning of exchange, it fell out of bed. But there is a need. You will not sell your property until you've got all these documents in place. Just get them ready now, and you can add to them. We all file our MOTs and service history away for our cars. Why wait? Why pay a solicitor £300 an hour to remind you to fill out a form or find the gas certificate?
I'm racking my brain for who I spoke to, but they'd done a survey. I think it was on like 500 or 1,000 agents as to which thing gives you the most excitement. And it was listing a property, getting the for sale board on that property, or the property completing. They want to list the property, and that gives them the biggest kick. We're going to have to delay your ecstasy because we actually now need this document before we can do it. And they already have a lot of documents to go through in order to get that. It's almost changing hearts and minds. And there is a change there. And I think technology has a part to play in that. I always bang on about Inventory Base and Steve Rad because they've got something in place that an agent can use. It's got all the schema and you can fill out a PIQ, and then all that just pulls across into the BASB or the TA6, TA7, TA10, whatever. And the technology is there to do it. It's almost sit down and convince agents, agent by agent, in order to be able to do that. I don't think a broad brushstroke is going to get agents to change. We've actually spoken to Tim Main on this podcast, and I've obviously spoken to Tim Main about a few things in general. And I agree, it's the right thing to do. And it is that storage. And I've got the folders somewhere of the car stuff and the gas stuff and the electricity stuff and the boiler and all that sort of stuff. And you do need it. But I think and I'm not blaming agents at all.
I think absolutely right. And the agent is in the great place of being somebody the vendor trusts. He's trusted them with selling the house. So the vendors will listen to them. And there are a range of documents which are required before they can exchange contracts. And that's the end goal, really, is getting the exchange away and the completion date set. And until those documents are in, it ain't going to happen. So the agent is best placed to say, really, I know you're busy. Do get this TA6 filled in or whatever, because you're going to need it. And if there's things, I'll have a look through it. If there's things I think might cause a bit of a ricket, we can manage them now rather than getting lawyers at £350 an hour to decide what they're going to do. And the vendor will be grateful that the agent's helping them sell the biggest asset they've got. And it's a legal minefield, and the agent, with his experience or her experience, can guide them through that way and develop a sort of a bond. And I wouldn't consider any other agent in the area and tell their friends about them. The agents could really leverage a position of just saying, go and find your gas safe certificate for the last 10 years. I think, cool, that's good advice. I'll do that.
Yeah, and if they can use that as a selling point, if they can say, do you know that we actually exchange twice as fast on average because we have a process that we can take you through and we'll hold your hand the whole way.
Yeah.
And customers hear that and they're like, oh, wow, yeah, great, because I know how these things go.
Yeah.
It's a really strong selling point.
The agent doesn't get paid until there's an exchange or completion. And he can vary that, and the longer the delay happens, the more people change their mind, or a third party comes in and makes an offer and throws everything out of kilter. You are going to have to get these documents before you have an exchange of contracts, so get them up front and save everybody a lot of time. That's the bottom line, really.
I think there is a play within this industry that is in prop tech in general that goes straight to the consumer. I don't know what it is. If I did, I would launch a company and do it. But I've got a feeling in the next sort of 2 to 3 years, somebody is going to come across and say, this is our play, to straight to the consumer.
Yeah.
And I think that will be really interesting. Obviously, not the same model as Purple Bricks, but
No, it'll be somebody who comes in with a really simple online platform, probably an app where you can, every time you have a bill for the house, done. Every time you get something done on every time you get a document come through, every time you have a change of plan, every single time anything happens with your house, you take a picture of it on your phone, it goes into the cloud, the data is parsed using some sort of machine learning or algorithm, and then all that information is stored in the cloud. The B2B play for that business will be selling that data to the industry. The B2C will be a free app for you to manage everything to do with your house, keep it all online. It'll be someone who gets the VC funding to do a massive B2C campaign. They'll do Facebook ads, Instagram ads, targeting people who have looked at Zoopla recently or any number of different potential buying signals online. Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that from a certain generation onwards, of homeowners and buyers, they would, myself included, wouldn't even think twice about using a product like that, whereas my parents wouldn't even think to get that themselves. If they were working with an agent and the agent encouraged them to do it, they would totally do it, but they wouldn't proactively engage with a platform like that, whereas I absolutely would. And there's a gamut of people in between, and not to pigeonhole people based on their age, of course, but there is a spectrum of proactive engagement with technology, and it skews young, and you will get over time, there'll be a sweet spot in time where it becomes very viable to put out a B2C campaign and people will use the product. The B2B play is for financial viability, because there won't be any B2C revenue generated by an app like that.
Although what you could have there, Rebecca, and just listening came to mind, you could have a situation whereby to store the documents in the app is completely free of charge, but you could have a sort of an additional service whereby for a fee, and it's not binding on the person who gives it, somebody could check through what you've put, make sure that the things and come up with suggestions that you do to make it more friendly. I'm not planning to sell my house anytime soon, but I'd love to pay X amount, have somebody go through all my documents, say, this might come, if you're coming to sell the house, this might be an issue, you might want to do something about this.
Definitely.
Or you're missing the guarantee for that window, so now's the time to go and find it, rather than 5 years' time when the firm's gone bust. And you're sale ready then as well. When you come to sell it, you're saying to the estate agent, I'm sale ready. The agent's going to love that if all your legal documents are in place.
Listening to all that, I'm just thinking, obviously, accountancy, that was a very paper-based, wait till the 10th of January and then send in all your receipts and all that sort of stuff. And now you've got your zeros and the Sage and all that sort of stuff. As soon as I get a receipt, petrol, whatever, train ticket, just put it on Zero. My accountant's got access to that. It's all there, just matches itself up and done automatically. So maybe it's very similar to what's there, but I can't think there's that many self-employed people that don't use something like that, either to do it themselves or through to their accountant. So that's quite interesting. Is there anything else you would say to, obviously you've got incredibly successful businesses, David, is there anything you would say to in the prop tech world or anyone starting up now? What would be your advice?
I think COVID has dramatically changed the auction industry. The barriers to entry for becoming an auctioneer, if you think back before COVID, if you want to be an auctioneer, you had to have a venue, you had to have an auctioneer, you had to have a catalogue, you had to have all that. Now anybody can be an auctioneer or run an auction, because it run eBay style. We're finding a lot of estate agents now are bolting an auction arm to their business because they don't need the catalogue, they don't need the vendor or the auctioneer. It's just a way of collecting bids and seeing who's prepared to pay the most for a property.
David, that was really interesting. And so I really enjoyed speaking to you the first time that I spoke to you as well. I think I could throw even Pioneer out there for you with some of the stuff that you've done. And
I've got a great team. I've got a really good team, and we collectively all listen to what the industry's saying and try and make it happen. I love it when somebody phones up, have you thought of doing this? Great idea. I'm straight on to one of the devs and getting it going. Without the team, I'd have nothing.
No. Thanks for joining us on the PropTech Growth Podcast. To learn more, you can find us on LinkedIn or email proptechpodcast@icloud.com. See you next time.